the topic I'm going to speak about is here, but just to give you a little bit of motivation to where this fits in this course. So basically, and of course my lecture is also going to be followed by a demonstration. So what we are going to do is to talk about one particular application which involves acquiring a signal and processing it on the fly. Okay. So this of course is going to be a common operation in any large IoT system where there are various kinds of sensors acquiring signals, right? And typically one of the things that could happen is the signal itself is streamed to some server for some information extraction or some processing which involves some information extraction, or otherwise it could be processed at the site itself. Something that they call edge computing, which is much more economical and much more practical. It avoids latencies and so on if you process the signal on the spot. So there are a number of devices that have been there to enable this kind of processing, that is processing signals or samples of signals digitally in a very efficient way. And that is what we call DSPs. Okay, so DSPs of course have been around for a long time. And they have a very special architecture in order to achieve this kind of what they call real-time processing of streaming signals. And it's possible that some of these architectures are, what are also going to be used by these edge devices, because in the IoT system also this kind of requirement does arise, that is processing, streaming signals or signals that are continuously received in a manner so that you are able to get information as the signal is being received and make decisions and so on while the sensing is in progress. Okay, so you can view this as an application like that. Now I don't know, maybe you already covered in some previous classes here. I'm not really sure, but are you familiar with the concept of real-time processing? Not really. Okay, fine. So I'll just give you some very basic background on that, and then we'll start with this particular application. Okay, so typically in the real world, we have signals which are coming usually from an analog source, and we need some sort of a transducer. The transducer converts it to typically an electrical form, right? So it becomes some sort of a voltage or current or something that we can actually, use either circuitry or use digital processing after sampling to work on, right? So the transducer, for example, could be any kind of, sort of acquiring a signal which could be of a mechanical nature, which could be of a chemical nature, it could be some kind of thermal signal. There are so many kinds of possible, signals that need to be sensed. And this transducer would convert it to another continuous form, a continuous waveform, but in the electrical domain, right? Now this we could actually do some analog signal processing on, by which we mean we do some appropriate operations either to modify the signal or to extract some information. For example, we just want to know whether the range of the signal is within certain bounds. We could just measure the amplitudes coming out over here and do that, right? This could also be some information itself that you will extract in order to either visualize or take some action on. Now what is more common or more reliable and better, if possible, is to process these signals digitally. Okay, so digital processing has a lot of advantages over analog processing, but of course there are also some clear limitations to digital processing that we'll talk about. So in the case of digital processing, it's a little more involved, the process, because it's not only about taking a transducer, but the signal has to be sampled, right, the continuous signal. Further, it has to be quantized to finite word length, right? And only then we can do some processing and we can extract information from the signal. If we want to restore the signal after modifying the signal itself, then we have to do the reverse operation of dequantizer and reconstructor, right? Okay, now all of these systems, they operate in something called real-time constraint. So what is the real-time constraint? So when we were talking about the analog processing, we can see that it's not easy, it's not hard to understand that as the signal is being acquired, the processing is taking place, right? Well, the same electrical signal that is going to go through this is probably going to be a circuit passing through this, and the whatever the speed is at which current and voltages pass, the analog signal is going to come out. But this is not what we can take for granted in a digital system, right? Because if we want it to be so-called real time, then we would like all this processing to take place without any loss of the signal. So the total time duration for all this processing, the sampling, quantizing process, this thing is severely constrained. Correct? Because the processing takes a long time, you can see that we won't be able to process the signal as it's coming in. There's no storage of the signal because we just assume that the signal is coming from minus infinity to infinity. We want to continuously process it, right? So that is what is called a hard real-time constraint, okay? So what does that constraint translate to in terms of computations? Because all the digital processing is always computations, right? What is on this processor is a program, right? It could be a program in C or it could be a program in assembly, depending on the processor we use. And our requirement then would be that all the processing that is done over here should be completed in the time available to us. And what is the time available to us? It is just the time taken to acquire a sample. So if we break down the processing into the amount of computations per sample, then we should finish all the computations per sample before the next sample comes in. Okay, so that is what is meant by a real-time constraint. Okay, now digital signal processing versus analog, like I told you, it has many advantages. You can write programs to do any kind of computation. On the other hand, you can't design a circuit to do certain kinds of computation, right? For example, some simple operations in the case of sound processing are to convert to log domain, correct? So you can see that it's very simple to write a program that will do log computationally rather than have a circuit to achieve it. So the possibilities are limitless in terms of the kind of computations or kind of processing you can do on the signal, the kind of modifications or the kind of mathematical operations that you can carry out on the signal, right? It's very flexible. It's only a code. You can even change all the parameters. It's not like redesigning the circuit and so on. And it's reproducible. The parameters, unlike in analog components, they don't drift with time or change their values or they have tolerances and so on. Everything is much more precise and much more controlled. Disadvantages, one of them is speed, and this is exactly what I talked about, the real-time constraint, correct? So if you have to implement something digitally, you have to finish all those operations in the time available to you, and that may not be trivial because sampling rates can be quite high. For audio, for example, sampling rates can be like 44,000 samples per second, or if you're dealing only with speech, usually we use only 16,000 samples per second. That means the time available per sample is only 1 upon 16,000th of a second, correct? And if you're going to do some complicated calculations, then we have to be very sure that it's going to get completed in that much time. So that may or may not be possible depending on the bandwidth of the signal, because higher the bandwidth, higher the sampling rate, lower the time interval available between samples, right? So very high bandwidth signals, it's not trivial to do digital processing, okay? Accuracy. Why are we saying accuracy over here? What are we talking about? Quantization. Exactly, the quantization. Because it's very accurate once you've represented the numbers in the finite word length. But on the other hand, you always have to round up or truncate or something to make those continuously varying amplitudes fit. For example, here is an analog signal. If we had to convert it to digital form, these would be the samples that we would take, right? Sampling itself is it's not an operation that really changes the signal in a sense. Ideally, we are able to reconstruct the signals from its samples, assuming that the sampling theorem is satisfied, right? On the other hand, quantization is where you are representing each level by the nearest available level out of a finite set of levels, right? So that is an irreversible operation. A signal once quantized, essentially, you don't have information there to recover its original amplitude, correct? Depending on the number of levels you choose, you will get some error in every sample, right? If you have fewer levels, then the advantage is you are able to store the samples with fewer bits. But on the other hand, you obviously have more quantization error, correct? Now, how much that quantization error can be and cannot be, it all depends on the signal itself, and it depends on the kind of operations that you're going to do on it. Okay, so let's give you some idea of typical rates in the case of sound signals. Telephony, for example, the mobile phone, we have all digital transmission, digital representation and so on in the current mobile phone setup. We use a sampling rate of only 8 kilohertz, okay? So although the speech signal has a larger bandwidth, we use 8 kilohertz because all the components of the signal required for its intelligibility, for me to understand the message, are there under 4 kilohertz, okay? So if you look at the speech signal, it has a spectrum of up to 7-8 kilohertz, but we can bandlimit it to 4 kilohertz and do our processing, and that's also the reason why your voice sounds different on the phone. Because when we talk face to face, we actually are hearing and utilizing the bandwidth up to 7-8 kilohertz. On the other hand, in the cell phone, it is first band limited, it is filtered to less than 4 kilohertz and then sampled at 8 kilohertz. And there's of course a reason for that. The lower the sampling frequency, the more time available for processing, the more efficiently you can compress the signal and so on, because you are removing certain components that are not absolutely necessary, right? Wideband audio, for example, on radio or television speech, it is sampled at a higher rate because our expectations of the quality are a bit higher. On the cell phone, we are willing to take a little bit of cut in quality for the sheer convenience and the cost and all that benefits that we get. But on television and so on, we have a higher expectation, so it's 16 kilohertz. Music has even higher sampling rate, okay? And where does this sampling rate come from? Because it comes roughly, it's related to the hearing properties, that is, we can hear supposedly up to 20 kilohertz, although it's not strictly true. Most adults can hear up to 15, 16 kilohertz. But 44 comfortably covers that. It's over twice 20 kilohertz, okay? So that's what you got. Now bits per sample. Sampling rate, you understood, is only the rate at which we acquire samples, that is talking about this, right? Bits per sample refers to this figure. How many levels are we going to use, right? Okay. So it turns out that for music, we need a minimum of 16 bits per sample, means how many levels? Right, so 32,767, 65,000, so yeah, plus minus 32,767 levels, right? Okay, and for speech, it turns out that it's okay. Okay, first of all, how do we come up with this? I mean, how do we decide this, that it takes 16 levels and not, let us say, 10 bits or not 20 bits?
Normally, it would depend upon the voltage levels within which you would be working. You would be dividing it and then seeing what is the quantization error that is acceptable.
Correct. So what is acceptable in the case of sound is what the human listener can perceive. Correct. So the point is that if we use fewer quantization levels and we play the original signal and its quantized version, or the one that we recover from quantization, even a very good listener cannot tell the difference if the number of bits used is at least 16. Okay. After that, some distortion is audible. Okay. Now, so you will ask for telephony, why? For speech, it turns out, as I said, our whole low level of acceptability of speech, as long as the message is clear and by and large you can recognize the voice and so on, we tend to be less fussy, and that's why we can get away with fewer bits per sample. Okay. Okay, so then that's exactly what I said. What is acceptable or what quantization error is too small, too big, just right, depends on the application. In this case, most of the time, it's about human perception. Okay, so now I just give you a short background, because after this we're going to give a demo on digital signal processing. So I said, as we wanted to do things in real time, the processor that we talked about here, or the processing that we talked about here, should obviously be very efficient, right? Because in 1 upon 16,000 or 1 upon 8,000 of a second, you have to complete all the computations. When I talk about the application itself, you'll realize how large the computations are, right? So this processor has to be an efficient one. So digital signal processors are specially designed actually in order to facilitate this kind of real-time processing, okay? And they do it because they have very special architectures, and the architectures are such. Yeah, somebody had a question? Yeah.
For wideband also we use 16 bits, and for high fidelity audio we use 16 bits.
Yeah.
Means for 16 kilohertz we could use lesser number of bits, I think.
Okay, so that's a good question. I don't know how many of you have this confusion. Is there any relationship between these two? Is this decided based on this? No. No. Because this is, like I told you, this is the sampling rate. This is decided by the bandwidth of the signal. You understand what we mean by bandwidth, right? That is the whole spectrum of the signal. Correct. So this has, and there are no two things. You have to satisfy the sampling theorem. Because if you don't, then you will get aliasing and it's irrecoverable. You can't recover the information.
But I can understand that if there are 4 levels,
yeah,
2 raised to power 2 means 2 bits are required to.
Absolutely, yeah.
If there are 44 kilohertz, means that is hertz, means.
No, what is hertz?
These are samples, na? These are
No,
samples.
no, this is just the rate at which the samples are coming. Okay, the time
These
duration.
are not levels. These are
No,
not
no, no,
levels.
no. This,
Okay.
so those 44 kilohertz
Okay.
refers to the duration between samples.
Okay.
Got it? 44,000 samples per second.
These
That
are not
means-
levels.
No, these are not levels. So there are. That's why I brought this up, because there are at least two parameters you have to specify in the case of all signals. I'm talking about audio, but all continuous signals. The moment we want to do some processing on them, which is typically going to be digital, we have to worry about the digital representation of the signal, right? The digital representation signal involves two distinct axes. One is the sampling axis, which has to do entirely with the bandwidth of the signal, and one is the quantization level, which has entirely to do with what is acceptable. And what is acceptable depends on the application. Okay. Okay, fine. So then I was telling you that DSP is digital. Now DSP here stands for processor. Okay, DSP is a subject called digital signal processing, but there's also DSP, which refers to the particular processor with a very particular architecture called a digital signal processor. So there are many types of processors, digital processors, but DSPs are a bit special. That architecture is a bit special because they are very good at doing doing math calculation, okay, because all our processing algorithms will find out the core operations in signal processing. I think all of you have familiarity with signal processing, right? You're all from ECE department, correct? So what is this operation? Huh? Convolution. And what do we use convolution for? Doing what to the signal? No, okay. What do we do? Why do we apply convolution to a signal? No, what's the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? Huh? Filtering, that's the key word, right? If I want to filter a signal, then I need to come up with a filter, design a filter, correct? I may want a low pass filter, high pass filter, band pass filter. Designing a filter gives me the impulse response of the filter, correct? Then what do I do? That means my design is over. Design is an offline process. Correct. Now my filter has to be implemented in real time. So now my incoming signal is continuously coming in. Maybe I want some data about the mean variation of the signal, something like a trend, right? So I might want to filter out the high frequency fluctuations. So I'll feed my sampled and quantized signal in, the filter will act on it, it will give me a smooth variation, and maybe that is what I want to see, correct? So then I need to do filtering. And what is filtering in digital processing? In analog, we know we can build a filter out of resistor, capacitor, and those components. But digitally, how to implement a filter is by doing this operation known as convolution. Correct? Although this says minus infinity to infinity, in practice, this is going to be a finite, not finite word line, finite duration filter. Correct? And so I will have to do. So let's say suppose the length of the filter h of n to minus k is 500. Okay, so then I will have to do for every output sample y of n, I have to do 500 multiplications, right? And then 500 additions to get this sum. So this operation has a very special name. It's called sum of products, because we take products and then take a sum. This is another very important operation in signal processing. What is this? Transform. So this looks like Fourier transform. So you take a signal, you apply a finite duration window to it. The signal itself is from minus infinity to infinity. I look at a certain number of samples by multiplying it by a w, and this w is non-zero only in some range, and I take the Fourier transform, correct? This is again taking a product and taking a sum. So this sum of products is a very is basically a common kind of operation that takes place in signal processing, okay? So these special architectures of DSPs are geared to do this particular operation very efficiently, okay? Now this is a block diagram. How do we do filtering? These are the filter coefficients. This is the signal. As the signal comes in, we take a set of samples, multiply them by the coefficients, add them up to get one output sample. Correct? Depending on the length of the filter, you have to consider the current sample as well as some number of previous samples. That's what convolution is about, right? I can write as h of k, x of n minus k. That means I'm going to keep looking at past samples, right? Okay, so how do we do sum of products? If you think about a normal computer doing sum of products, you will have to fetch the instruction, fetch the coefficients, fetch the data, multiply. Multiply itself is easy to say, but it's a very complicated operation. It involves multiple shifts and adds, right? Then you have to accumulate, which is the add, then you have to store, then you have to again shift the data by 1, because the filter will now want to compute the next output sample, and shift the data in memory, and then again loop and continue, right? So it's very, very complicated. So DSP architectures are really built to do this whole thing very efficiently. So they optimize for arithmetic and data handling, which is common to all signal processing applications. A common operation in DSP or signal processing algorithms is multiply add, correct? So there is a special hardware designed on the chip, which is called a MAC. It is a single instruction multiply accumulate. So what I showed you in terms of multiply taking many instructions plus involving addition followed the multiplication. It's all of it is done in a single instruction called a MAC in a single clock cycle on a DSP. It's basically it's in the hardware. Okay, so the chip has an architecture which has a special part on the silicon which actually does MAC in a single cycle. Then other considerations are it consumes minimum power, which is also very important for the kind of computing we are talking about. Naturally, you have so many devices and so on, and they are not getting some kind of power from the grid or anything. They have to be on battery power. It has to be small in size, and the real-time operation is what I talked to you about. That's the way some of the requirements of real-time processing are met. Okay, now just some quick examples. Cell phone. Now your cell phone. One very important component of the cell phone circuit is a DSP, right? And the DSP is required because the cell phone does some very heavy duty processing of the speech that is received and converts it to digital speech, which is bits per second. The bits per second, it's not only sampling and quantization, it also does a compression, okay? Because if we were doing sampling and quantization only for speech, then we would have 8,000 samples per second into, let's say, even 12 bits or 10 bits per sample. It's already a very high bit rate, whereas the cell phones operate at much lower bit rates, right? Because the spectrum is expensive, so many voice calls have to be multiplexed and sent and so on, right? So that's a very complicated operation, converting it to a compressed form. So all that takes place in the microprocessor, the DSP processor. And real time, in this case, what does it imply? That as we are speaking, right, we are not going to store and your message is going to reach later. If you want to have a conversation, then the delay that is tolerable should be no more than 100 milliseconds. Otherwise, you just keep saying hello, hello, hello. It's like it's going to disrupt the conversation, right? So it has to be flowing continuously, right? So we have very serious constraints, and that's why we need a sophisticated processor like a DSP in this device. Then there are other things like music player, which also uses DSP. In general, like I told you, as the bandwidth of the signal goes up, sampling rate goes up, and then we cannot use very complicated algorithms. Then we have to use simpler algorithms simply because the number of operations required gets too high. Okay. Then there are other applications like embedded vision where you would use DSP. That means in cameras. So if you're in surveillance cameras, you want to take or do some processing, extract some information at the camera site itself, not send it to some server and do, which is of course what you would do because image processing operations are quite intensive. So common operations like object detection, tracking, recognition. These days you must have heard of neural network based systems, right? So they're very powerful, but they're also very complex in terms of the inference engine. Many operations are required, right? So once again, there are similar concentrations. There are convolution neural networks, deep neural networks, which are making people try to think about how these can be embedded by doing the kind of, optimization that has been done with signal processing algorithms. That is, represent it first of all in finite word length, and then try to cut down on the computations to the extent possible, reduce it to few multiplications and additions, and so on. Okay. Okay, so these are just, these are important characteristics of DSP. So I think that should do for now. I won't get into the architecture. Now I'll get to my, the main part of the presentation, but there's a lot of information available on this. And the idea was just to realize that yes, there needs to be a lot of attention also to computing in terms of how to accomplish the operations that we want in real world systems in the most efficient way possible. Okay, any questions so far?
Most of the cell phones would normally have SOCs with ARM processors. So the DSP processor would be built in as a part of that? Because
yeah. So there's a DSP core, but it also has other more general functionality, yes. So the DSP core is mainly used, okay, some of the communication protocol also requires a lot of computation. So DSP is used for that, and then also for the compression itself. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to talk now about a specific use case or a particular application in audio. So I'll give you a little bit of background. See, typically when you study signal processing, and you must have realized it's just a set of mathematical tools, right? Its value comes in the fact that it's very practically applied. But to apply it, you have to understand the domain in which you are applying it. What kind of signals are you dealing with? What kind of information are you trying to extract? What is the nature of the computations you will need to do, and so on. The computations that you will need to do will, of course, depend on the signal processing algorithm you will be applying. But which signal processing algorithms to apply and how to set their parameters depends on your understanding of the type of signal and the type of application. Okay? So this is meant to be a kind of an example illustrating that. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about some of these things, about sound in general, what kind of a signal it is, in particular about speech, signal properties, then a particular application called command word recognition. This is the one that we've actually implemented, or we'll show you a demo of a real-time implementation of this particular application. It's called speech to text. It's probably something that you're already using on your mobile phone and so on. But most of the time what you're using on a mobile phone, what happens is it gets sent to the server. I don't know if you're aware of that. So all these devices that you have, by and large, once the device is, you give a signal to wake up the device, it's actually sending the speech to over internet, and then the recognition result is coming back, right? But what we are trying to understand is how can we actually do this? What kind of hardware and software is required to do this on the device itself? Okay, so sound, as you must be knowing, is a mechanical waveform, right? What is the sound about? It's about atmospheric pressure changes, rarefaction, compression, right? We've all studied this. But we want to work on it, we have to use a transducer. So what is a transducer called for sound? Microphone, correct? Now actually my voice, it's mechanical because as I'm actually changing the air pressure variations in front of my mouth. That is going to the membrane of the microphone, right? And then it's turning to electrical form. There is no need to turn it, but I'm talking to you and your ear cannot perceive electrical signals. You need the mechanical signals to come back on your ear and to vibrate the membrane. But why are we doing it in electrical form? Transducing it? To amplify it. So what that is happening is getting electrically amplified and then is getting played out through the speaker. Once again, the speaker membrane is vibrating and converting it to mechanical, and that's falling on our ears, right? So that's what the word transducer will do for you. Change this, so assuming we have some sinusoidal kind of tone, then this is what it will look like. Okay, so that's what we would like to see. Okay, now how does audio work? So audio, basically, if you're going to do some processing, it's a two-way. One is the recording itself and the other is the playback, correct? So recording involves air pressure variations falling on the microphone. Typically analog, before we start processing, we might want to do some analog amplification, pretty much like what is going on now. This is all analog only, whatever, the current system, correct? And then we would always do anti-aliasing filter, because the moment you have to sample something, it's always better to band limit it to be absolutely sure, right? And always we are trying to band limit it to as little as possible. So that's called an anti-aliasing filter. And then we would have A to D converter, correct? Depending on the sampling rate, this A to D converter time will be set for between samples time, and then we would quantize, and in memory we would have these quantized numbers, right, corresponding to the samples. For playback, once again, these binary numbers will have to, or whatever, suppose we have done some processing or anything, we would like to convert it back by a DAC, correct, and then pass it through a low pass filter. This is all part of the reconstruction. Then we may want to amplify the signal which has come out of the processing and then play it out through a loudspeaker, okay. So this is very, very traditional kind of chain that we would follow in order to process the signal digitally. Okay, this I already went through, this also I went through. Okay, what do speech waveforms look like? Okay, so this is what a speech waveform looks like. It's amplitude versus time. So this is if you recorded your speech, or otherwise you could look at the output of the transducer, then it would essentially have these kind of components, and you see that there is a lot of variation. There are some very quiet portions, and then there are some relatively high amplitude portions, okay. So these are, if you zoomed in, you would see these kind of portions. So you would see some portions which are very periodic, which are typically corresponding to the vowels, and then you would see some relatively weaker portions which are typically corresponding to the consonants, okay. Okay, so now what is speech to text? So we want to take a recorded waveform and figure out what the words spoken are, right? So for example, a waveform like this, waveform of an utterance, should get converted to, this is presumably the waveform of somebody uttering the words 1, 2, 3, okay? So what we want to convert it to in speech to text applications is to the sequence of words 1, 2, 3, right? Okay, now in order to do this properly and why we do certain, so this is pretty complex operation actually, this mapping between the waveform and the words. We need to understand a little bit more about how the information about the words is embedded in the speech signal. Okay, I showed you the waveform itself doesn't make much sense, it just looks like some random variations, but it pretty much has the information of the words which are spoken, right? So where is that information and what kind of mathematical operations do we need to do in order to extract it, right? Okay, so I'll tell you some little background on generating. How do we generate speech? So humans have this very remarkable ability. Of course, there are some higher animals also who can make, use sound for communication. But of course, humans have an extremely sophisticated system to do it. The origins of the sound are actually the vocal cords. So if you place your hand on your neck and say ah, or just place it while you're speaking, you'll hear some sort of vibration. Okay, so vocal cords are a membrane, are a pair of tendons like this that open and close, and let out puffs of air from the lungs. So we always breathe, we always speak when we are breathing out, and then you have to stop speaking and take a breath, right? And that's why we have to interrupt our speech. And that is the air that is, so our breathing is going on through speaking, and when we are not speaking, we are breathing with the, tract wide open, no vibration, nothing, it's just a smooth flow of air. Right? But while we are speaking, there is opening and closing, and that is really the signal that is responsible for the sound itself. Okay? Now, this would all be very fine if we were just going to open our mouth and say ah, then this describes it. But of course, that's not very good for communication. We need a variety of sounds to be able to communicate. So we have much more than this in order to shape the sound signal that comes out of our mouth, and that happens because of the tract. So this is the vocal folds opening and closing, and the tract is, so forget about the nasal cavity, the oral cavity. When you open your mouth, there is a path for these vibrations to go out, okay? And this part really acts like a tube that is closed at one end because this opening is very narrow, and open at the other end, right? And this tube acts like a passive filter, and it shapes the vibrations that are leaving the vocal cords, okay? So we are expecting that some components of this vibration, so the vibration can be viewed as simply an pulse strain. When it opens and closes, we have one pulse, right? And a simple pulse strain, a periodic pulse strain, has quite a large number of frequency components at the fundamental frequency, first harmonic, second harmonic, and so on. But the shaping which happens when it passes through the tract is going to change the spectrum, and that's why we can produce a sound of a particular nature depending on the shape of this cavity, correct? How do we produce all these different sounds of speech? We produce them by changing the shape of the cavity. As we speak, we are continuously moving the mouth, tongue, jaw, lips, and so on. So all of this is actually changing this chamber shape. So we say that the tongue, we might say the tongue is for, tasting food, and it's a part of the digestive system, but actually its even more important role is in speech, correct? We know that, right? You have to move the tongue to speak, and it's very important in terms of creating a very wide variety of sounds because it's so flexible and can take on so many positions. So not only tongue, lips, and so ah, e, they're all different in terms of the shape of the mouth. So you change the shape of the mouth, you're changing the cavities that the vibrations are passing through, and that is changing the sound, okay? And how are we changing the sound? Because the cavities have different resonances because of different shapes of the mouth, correct? So the spectrum of the sound is changing. So that suggests to us that if we were able to recover this spectrum and find out the salient or the high components in the spectrum, then we may be able to identify the underlying sound. Okay, so that's basically the very basis of a speech. So for example, this is the spectrum of the sound E, beat, oo as in boot, and ah as in Bart. Okay. So now we know that E has a very peculiar spectrum. It has a high peak around 300 Hertz and then no frequency components, prominent components until 2000 Hertz, right? Whereas in R, we have two resonances relatively close by around 1 kilohertz. Okay. So these are the signatures of these sounds. Okay. Okay. So the net spectrum that we are going to have of speech involves the spectrum of the vibration multiplied by the resonances of the tract to give you the resulting spectrum. So if we were to compute the Fourier transform of this speech signal, then we should be able to find these peaks and in principle relate them to the underlying sound. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure I'm going to have time to explain the spectrogram and that part to you. So have you people seen speech signals and spectra? Have you seen? Okay, so basically if you use an audio editor, you can see that. So maybe I'll just very quickly show one example. Okay, this is a waveform. Okay, so I'll play it for you and you'll watch the cursor go over it.
मछली जल की है रानी, जीवन उसका है पानी.
Okay, so that was a male speaker, we could make that out, right? And he was uttering a number of words, two phrases, machli jal ki hai rani, then there was a pause. So you can see a silent region over here, correct? So when there's not much energy leaving, then we have only this background noise. And then he started again and said this other phrase, right? So now all those sounds we talked about that we can generate are all lined up over here, right? So if I pick only a first few okay, so let's look at this in more detail. Now you can see the waveforms more closely. Now if I play this, you'll hear only some of the words.
मछली जल.
Okay, so now this is the sound ch. Ch is a very noisy sound. You can even think about it because we let out a lot of air and there's a random noise kind of signal leaving the vocal tract at that time. Ch, macha, li, this is E and this is la. Okay, this is ja, jal, ki. So that is all that has happened over here. So the idea is that when we speak, what we are doing is our vocal tract is making different shapes and at any given time, it corresponds to one basic sound. And what are the basic sounds of speech? Essentially, they're called the phonemes or the phones. How many do we have in any language? Exactly. So, a, e, u, they are all the sounds and pa, pa, ba, ba, ma, cha, 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 na. So, all of these are the sounds of speech, correct? So, what we are doing essentially is we are producing sequences of those sounds and we don't typically have silence between words. We don't stop, machli, jal, we just make it out from the continuous stream. So, we are uttering a continuous stream of phones, except of course when we are taking pauses because of silences and other kinds.
Would there be a difference in the signal for different people?
Absolutely, absolutely. Correct. So in fact, it turns out there is a lot of difference in the waveforms for different people. But what is not so different is the spectrum of the signal. So I'll just show you the spectrum of this signal. Okay, so like I told you, the dark portions of the signal are the resonances of the vocal tract. So M turns out to have only low frequency components. Has these components which are around 100 Hz. Now what is happening is, what we are seeing are the resonances of the vocal tract. So these are the real signatures which are somewhat invariant. Everybody saying will have a certain shape of the vocal tract and therefore their resonance will be more or less at the same position, not identical. But they will be similar enough so that you don't, somebody's doesn't get confused with somebody else's E. Okay, so they are different, but that is why we have only a finite number of symbols in a language. So if you go to any of the world's languages and look at the vowels, not all languages have the same number of vowels or the same vowels, right? Now, A is an American vowel or an English vowel we don't have in Indian languages. But every language from the space of vowels has chosen some locations for their language which are sufficiently far apart so that any one person's vowel or everybody's vowels together are clustered apart from a different vowel. Okay? So these signatures in terms of the resonance locations are the main. Now ch is very, very noisy and it has high frequency components. And ja is also very similar to ch, correct? Except that it also has low frequency, whereas ch does not have low frequency. So these are the patterns that we want to get out of the signal if we are doing speech to text. Okay? So any questions? Okay, so what we want now is to do the speech to text, right? So what will we try to do? We will try, now here is the spectrogram that I showed you. This is 1, 2, 3. Okay, and there is silence between the utterances 1, 2, 3. So if we can get these patterns, 1, how many basic sounds are there in 1? No. Correct? The is also there. It's not win, it's 1, right? 2, u. Correct? So these are all the phonemes that are being uttered. 3 is th. Th is a basic sound in our language, right? Although in English you have to write th, etc., etc. It's th, like, you know, I mean, it's th, we have th as a basic sound, correct? So these are the signatures of the sound. Okay, so speech to text involves these basic processes. First, in any application dealing with voice, we have to first remove the silences, right? Because the silences are easily detected by and large because they are quiet portions relative to the speech signal, right? So it's called speech segmentation. We are going to remove only the words from the silences. After that, we have to extract the features. So what are the features? The features are exactly what I showed you here. The features are the spectra of the features as we go along. So I cannot take one giant spectrum of this because it will make no sense whatsoever. What I really want is to capture the spectrum of the speech as it is changing. As I am speaking, the spectrum is changing, and that is what I need to capture because that is going to help tell me which word I am speaking depending on which phones I am uttering. Correct? Okay. So what we do, we take the signal and we slice it into narrow slices. We take a spectrum of each slice and then we try to do some pattern matching with already trained templates. Okay. Yeah, to determine what is the underlying phone and eventually what is the underlying word. Right? So that's called frame-wise feature extraction, and then what I talked about is the pattern recognition. Okay. Okay, so if you do speech silence segmentation, it's very easy to do. You can use energy, so you can just compute the sum of the squares of the amplitude in each narrow slice and see if it's high enough, it's a speech region. If it's very low, it's a silence region. Okay. Then next we will divide it into what are called narrow slices, that is small frames. In each frame we will take a Fourier transform. It's called the short time spectrum. So we are taking the spectrum, but it is called short time spectrum because we are using narrow duration windows. Okay. So we get many such spectra and these are all corresponding to this here, one spectrum, second spectrum, third spectrum. So every about 50 or 100 times a second we will take a slice and compute its spectrum, correct? And the whole pattern together from here to here and here, the two-dimensional pattern is going to tell me that this is the number 1, right? Okay, so now getting into the actual computational block, the actual signal processing we have to do to achieve this pattern recognition is we take the utterance, endpoint detection is the same as speech silence detection. Then we do some sort of emphasis because the high frequency components of spectrum tend to be weak, so we boost them a bit so that we can get a more clear idea about the spectrum. Then we do this what is called framing, make it into short segments and take its Fourier transform, magnitude square of the Fourier transform. After this we have to extract a pattern which will show us very clearly where the high regions and the low regions of the spectrum are because that's the signature of the underlying sound. Okay. So that is achieved by what is called a filter bank, that is passing it through different filters to see which of the filters has more energy relative to the others. This gives you a pattern because audio or sound in general has a very high dynamic range. We have to take a logarithm, right? And then there's another further step of compression which is just used to represent the spectrum. So then we do another transform which is very similar to a Fourier transform, but it's just a way to compress a spectrum in few coefficients. The reason we are interested in compressing is because we keep a very big pattern for pattern matching. It's going to be computationally very heavy. So we try to represent the pattern for each underlying sound in as compact way, as few elements as possible, so that the pattern matching can be done easily. Okay. So essentially this whole thing is about reducing the time domain signal to a pattern, right? And if you are doing word recognition, then the pattern would be a two-dimensional pattern, very much like the spectrum that you saw here, but it would be very compact. So you would represent this whole thing in very few coefficients. But as I said, we have to consider the underlying sound. So maybe we look at this as a pattern where every slice is representing the spectrum and how the spectrum is changing in time is telling you what the word is. Okay. Okay, so now next I'm going to talk about the pattern matching itself and why it is not very straightforward in the case of speech. Okay, maybe you can tell me this. So if we have this pattern for 1 and I have a stored pattern, then I can compare the two, right? But there is a little bit of complication there. How do I compare two patterns? Yeah. Correct. But there is one problem, and that the patterns are going to be different between two speakers on two dimensions. One is the spectrum may not be identical because the vocal tract, how people speak, the dimensions of their vocal tract and all are different. So it's going to be slightly different at least. The other thing we have to consider is the rate of speaking. I might say 1 and somebody else might say 1, right? And they're going to be completely different because one of those ones lasted for, very long and one was short. So how do you compare two patterns of unequal duration, right? So how do we do that? How do you think we should do that?
Frequency component of both the words, there may be some similarity to that. So according to that, we can do some kind of correlation.
Okay. See, the point is that in this pattern, the pattern is changing as we go from here to here, correct? And when I'm comparing,
We remove the time frame at all. We just compare the
frequencies, right? But the point is that we have to compare corresponding portions. So if there are two people saying 1, I have to compare ver with ver, with and ner with ner, right? I can't compare the patterns, or I can't overlay the patterns on top of each other without synchronizing the underlying sounds, right? So this is the short time Fourier transform, but in one case it is long, and if I say this very fast, like 1 is going to be very short. Okay, so what we need to do, one way is to stretch one of them to the length of the other. But what's the problem with that? When we speak faster and slower, we don't necessarily it's not about just stretching the speech.
The words itself would distort.
Exactly. So what happens is, if you are trying to speak fast, it turns out that what you are compressing is only the vowels, right? You are not changing the consonant. So we have some kind of non-linear change, right? So you try to say, suppose you're calling your friend Ravi, and you just say Ravi, and then you want to, call out in an extent way, maybe you're calling out something, you say Ravi. Now, what did you compress? Or what did you stretch? You did not really stretch the consonants, but you stretched the vowels, right? So if you have to compare two instances of this, it's not going to work out until you do some sort of a synchronization between the two. Okay, now that operation is called dynamic time warping. So this is like comparing two templates. So these are basically the same shape, but I can't compare them point to point, because what I need to compare is this detail with this detail, this with this. But if I align it like this, they are not falling on top of each other, correct? So we need to do something called dynamic time warping, where I first find the corresponding parts and then I compute the distance between only the corresponding parts. Okay, so it's called dynamic time warping because the warping is not a constant factor. The factor itself keeps changing, right? Okay, so there is a way to do it. It's like finding the optimal path that minimizes the distance between the patterns. So this whole thing about recognizing the words spoken is about finding the spectral vectors, because they relate to the underlying sounds, and also doing the necessary time warping and then comparing it with the template.
You said we can compress the signal or stretch the signal. So which one is the better one? Compressing the signal will give you the best.
Yeah, no, we will do whatever it takes so that we achieve this alignment. So in some portions it might get compressed, some portions stretched. Correct. So there is a way, there's an algorithm that allows you to find that optimal match. Okay, and that's the dynamic programming algorithm, and that's what is used over here. Okay, now this is a nice concrete example. Suppose in the database you have a template stored for 6, which is 6. It's a, one interval sir, 2 intervals e, 1 interval k and sir. 6 has sir, e, k, sir, right? SIX, but sir, e, k, sir, right? And suppose a person saying the test utterance which you want to compare is much slower. So they'll say 6, right? So now if I have to compare them, I have to find this path so that I match up only the corresponding phonemes. Okay, so if you look up dynamic time warping, in the literature, you'll get examples like this that show you what is meant by doing the computing the distance, that is by actually doing the matching at the level of these intervals. Okay, finally that's it. So the summary was, we did speech-style segmentation, we extracted spectral features, and then we did a pattern recognition comparing with templates to get the detected words. Okay. Okay, so this is the demo we'll be showing you, but just to conclude, the IoT with sound, actually, for example, environmental monitoring, sound meter, they can all be viewed as devices where we are sensing, this time sound, and then doing some sort of computations in order to get the levels, right? Do you know how sound level meters work? You must have heard of this, right? Whenever there's a festival or anything, there are people publishing or in fact there are rules that the sound level should not exceed so many dB SPL and so on, right? So the way they do it is it has a bunch of filters inside, because it's not only about the intensity. It is about the intensity as it is perceived by the human ear, and the human ear is more sensitive to some frequencies and less sensitive to others. So before it computes the intensity of the sound, it weights it in a manner, right? The more sensitive frequencies are given higher weights, and then it computes. So all that computation can be done using filters on the device, right? Other applications, of course, you know about these devices now, like the Google device and the Amazon Echo and so on. They also do the sensing of the sound. In fact, they use multiple microphones. What is the advantage of multiple microphones over one microphone? Okay, simpler question. Why do we have 2 ears? One nose. 2 ears. Why? Huh? Redundancy. Oh, I see. Okay. Nice one. So that women can wear 2 earrings. Huh? Exactly, it's all about stereo reception, right? So this is for localization. What do we mean by localization? I can pay attention to a particular direction, right? So that's how I increase the signal to noise ratio. If it's a room full of people talking, I can pay attention to my friend who is sitting next to me because of the localization, right? So that's pretty much what we try to achieve using multiple microphones. Okay. So here is an example of that. Here is a microphone array, and there are many things going on. There is some kind of playback going on over here. It's actually just simulating the walls reflecting the sound actually. There is a speaker, main speaker here. There's another speaker speaking here. There's a fan here. So now if we can actually combine the outputs of multiple microphones so that it can focus in a particular direction, because there's going to be a slight phase shift between all this because they are separated from each other. So we can do it in a manner that all these other sources get more or less cancelled, and we can get only a desired source, right? So we enhance the signal to noise ratio. So now this is real world applications where people even talk to devices which are far away, and there's a lot of ambient sound. It's called distant speech because you're speaking from a distance. It's also collecting ambient sound. It's got room effects like reverberation and so on. So these multiple microphones have become very important. So all of these devices actually have many microphones. Okay, now one this thing this is actually available on a device. You can call Google speech to text API, which is what your voice recognition applications are doing. But just to tell you how complicated speech recognition is, if you call this, you have to specify many things. I don't know if you people have seen this. So here the sentence being uttered was Euler, a Swiss mathematician, was the father of pure mathematics. Now, very challenging sentence to recognize, even if it is as models for English language. You have to first of all specify the language. So then they tell the language in one of these parameters. Where is the language given? Somewhere it says English. Where does it say English? Oh, language code EN. So maybe this was spoken by an Indian speaker. You have to say Indian English. Why do you have to say Indian English? Huh? Because of the accent. Exactly. So the models that are stored, they will pull them out from Indian speakers. Okay, and you must have heard Trump's speech the other day. That was quite hilarious. Yeah, what is it? Chivala. No, it wasn't even Chivala, it was Chwala or something like that, and they spelled it Chivala because it was yeah. So that's how accent is, right? I mean, you would think, huh?
We have heard this is extremely computationally heavy.
It is.
The Google platform, extremely computationally heavy, and when you try and actually use the API with your device, it tends to become extremely slow in terms of response.
No, the API is not. API is slow because it is the latency of sending and receiving, maybe.
That's exactly.
Yeah, because the computation is getting done on the servers in the cloud. Yeah, so that is the point. So the application that I showed you, the real-time application, was just for digit recognition, right?
Here we're doing a full speech.
Yeah. So the point is that we should try and get some of the same, like that was like a good case for command word recognition. So you are operating some device and with voice commands, you want it to get done over there because you can't have the latency. Maybe you're controlling some kind of robotic arm or something like that. So that was an illustration of that. But these APIs, of course, this Google API. So it needs so much information. Okay, EN, IN for Indian English, and then also some of the words are supplied like Euler, Swiss, and so on, because these are a bit unusual. So we are prompting it telling it that this is also in the vocabulary. Okay. So when the templates are stored for the speech recognition, it depends on the language. It depends on what are the words of that language, but it also depends on the pronunciations of the population that it is being targeted to, who is going to use it, and so on. Okay. So all that, of course, design is done in the backend. But then after that also the pattern matching itself, which is usually now they use neural networks, which act like statistical models in order to achieve it. Okay. Okay, fine. So this is only about different APIs and so on. Okay, so that pretty much brings me to the end of this presentation. Any questions?
Since our prime concern is about the IoT, so as an example, you showed us one example that we are measuring the sound level or maybe the sound for that matter.
Yeah.
What type of compression technique would be particularly useful, because the bandwidth is at a premium?
What is at a premium?
The bandwidth over which we are sending the, from the site to
correct. So now for this sort of thing, in fact, I saw an application recently of a smart Samsung TV where you are able to sit on your sofa and talk to the TV about changing the channels and so on. So apparently the microphone array for that is on the top panel of the TV, and they have a microphone array. So they have, like, I showed 4 microphones or something like that. But the processor, to process it, they're not even sending it on the server. The processor is sitting at the bottom. And then they have to use a cable to even send that sound over, which is actually a problem, even taking the sound from the top of the TV to the processor down. So they're thinking of putting some tiny little devices which will process the sound there itself, the commands. So sending sound is difficult. We have to use compression, like you said. There they are sending the direct sound because they're just using an audio cable. But to send the sound itself, then we would have to use like MP3 compression. So MPEG-3 compression is about essentially converting it to as few bits per second as possible. So there's a compression algorithm to do that. So it basically tries to retain the spectrum of the signal, because the spectrum is what really contains the information, and it does some kinds of things like dropping the phase and representing.
Because in such an example, the processing of the signal would actually happen at the cloud. So even though we are compressing it at site so that the bandwidth is not compromised, but at the same time we don't want to compromise the signal at this at the cloud where the actual processing is
right. So that is about speech. You want to compress it, but you can't lose the intelligibility and the information. Correct. So that's true. So MP3, you must have heard of MP3 for its use for music, right? For speech, there are special compression algorithms. But the music compression is a little more general because there is no fixed model for it. But those are the kind of compression mechanisms that are used. Okay, anything else? Okay, great. So we'll just show you the demo. That will take maybe 10 minutes and 10-15 minutes. So this demo is exactly the problem we are talking about, that we want to process on the site at the time of the acquisition of the singer. Okay, not send it over, because powerful servers can do anything, right? But that's not the point.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Pulkit and I am tech student here. So like ma'am has already mentioned about the application of this device. So what I'm going to present is the voice like digit recognition using this board, the board from TI, Texas Instrument 320C5515 or 35. So it's a 16-bit fixed point processor. So the entire application has been built on that. So the general setup for such an application would look like, this is the board that we are talking about, and they are the codecs here, or they act as a used for giving an input to the device, and this is the microphone that we are going to connect it. And as ma'am mentioned, there is a cable that connects the microphone array to the processor, so you could connect, you can visualize this as that. And then whatever the processing is done, this device will output the digit. So we are using a software called as Code Composer Studio, which shows you the real-time plot of the speech signal that has been acquired, and also shows you, we are basically printing out the digit. Let's say the digit is 0 or digit is 1. You could have connected some, let's say an LED or some other applications on the GPIO pins of this, and performed an applications based upon the digit that has been recognized. So for the practical implications, what all parameters we have used to make this device work, it is something like this. Like what we have assumed is, okay, sampling rate we have used is 8000 Hertz, and we have considered the fact that the user finishes speaking the digit in a maximum of 500 milliseconds, not more than that. That is one of the limitations, or not the limitations, one of the assumptions that we have assumed. Also, since the sampling rate is set to 8K, we are around capturing 4096 samples, since the buffer length was 512 milliseconds to be more approx. samples whenever voice activity is detected. So you could see one of the snapshot of the signal, speech signal that has been detected here. And the block diagram, like the main processing that has been done is, first of all, is a data acquisition. These DSPs provide something, a special feature called as ping pong buffering, which is used like you need to have the sample before the next sample arrives, the processing should be done. But since FFT and all these are computationally heavy, so you need a parallel buffer. You do not engage the processor for the acquisition purpose also. And as it is sampling at 8K. Then, like ma'am said, we have to use STFT, short time Fourier transform. So we basically do framings here, and then there should be overlapping frames. So that overlap we have considered to be of 15 milliseconds. And then as you saw the spectrogram, the spectrogram is a Fourier transform, frequency versus time plot. So we take an FFT of each of the frame multiplied by a Hamming window, of course band limiting or finite duration, and then we apply this filter bank operation, which is basically modeling the vocal cords, as ma'am told, not in detail, maybe short of time. Then this is the 26 point DCT, we take it. DCT is basically a domain in which the signal tends to become sparser. So we can take the initial coefficients so that the maximum information is captured and leave out the rest. And then for the comparison or for the template matching, we use this algorithm DTW. So it will compare reference vector with the DCT vector that we obtained for the current user. So for this applications, we have stored 6 samples of 0 to 5 digit, one of male speaker and one of the female speaker on this board. We could like not exceed more than that because of the DSPs are quite memory limited. So we need to take care of that also. And since when you speak, so that word will, that vector, feature vector will be compared with all the voice template that are present. So that will involve latency also. So like we stored around 12 samples that is working, one for the male voice and one for the female voice. So now I'll just quickly show you a demo of this. Like this is the DSP board I'm talking about. I mean, at a later point of time you could come and see this. So it has this dedicated FFT. Yeah, what's special about the DSP is that it has a dedicated FFT hardware. So like computing a FFT of a signal again and again, as this block diagram tells, it's a quite computationally heavy. So what FFT does, it provides a FFT hardware accelerator that does this work on the go, and it's quite efficient.
All these numerical values are by default, or you are setting?
No, we set it this, like the signal hopping could be it's like 15 milliseconds I have used. It could be 10 milliseconds or like 15 milliseconds. This is what we have used, 10, 20, that way. So 15 milliseconds turns out to be a good one. Yeah, this has a special hardware for FFT. But again, then this DCT thing, we cannot do it directly on this. So we have to write a code for performing this DCT. Had we written a code for performing the FFT also, like in from scratch here in C, so then that would have increased the latency even more. In order to give the the block diagram that I have shown, so we need a microphone array for that. So we need a microphone like for giving the input. So I'm using my phone's microphone as the mic here to giving the input to the DSP. So this we can download a third-party application. So that will make your mobile phone work as a microphone. Okay, so here whatever the waveform when I will speak will come, and you could see the speech waveform here, and whatever the digit that we decode will print on this console window. 0. Like whatever I speak, it did captured here, and that would decode here. Since like I spoke 0, like I speak a bit slowly, so that is taking a lot of time to compute, and then you could get a 0 here. Like I could test for other words also, but it may happen that it's not always accurate. There are chances of error. 1. A decoded one. So the templates that are stored here are of not mine, it's of a different person, but like he speaks a bit faster. So here this DTW thing did happen, and like 32 frames is the maximum that we have formed, but we are only considering the considerate part of the speech. So we are using some kind of a terminating the signal or a voice activity detection, but here not a voice activity detection algorithm is used, just a simple thresholding based is used. So that thresholding may also vary depending upon the device because of the wear and tear. I think that's it. Those who want to test can come here and like they can do. Okay, and I could have show you a bit at the code also. So those who want to test, they can come because it's not visible quite clearly.